I wish you're coping well's Buddy Boyos. Before anything else, let me show you the full outline of the video, which you can use as a guide if you want to navigate through the content. After the last video, I got some criticism on certain points that I'd like to address. For those wondering what criticism I'm talking about, since the video literally had 12 views and 0 comments, I'm referring to criticism on Discord that I found relevant, because it allowed me to clarify points that were probably too vague in the previous video. First criticism: I didn't talk about political solutions. First of all, I'm not really capable of doing that. And besides, the video was already addressing the question of the non-existence of viable political solutions. In my view, I said in the last video when presenting the outline, and finally, we'll conclude by seeing that this isn't a cultural problem, it's a natural one, rooted in biology. And because of that, there is no solution. So, I'll develop a bit more on why I think political solutions are neither plausible nor necessarily desirable. But first, yes, other political systems can exist. Yes, we can imagine social structures that constrain promiscuity through more or less coercive means. Yes, we can imagine different systems where not every inequality between men and women is seen as inherently unjust, but where the idea that differences, sometimes deep ones, between the sexes exist is accepted, and where complementarity takes precedence over strict equality. Systems that would value modesty, where marriage is still respected as a lifelong pact, under penalty of social or even religious exclusion. These are systems that sometimes, but not always, reduce inequality in the sexual marketplace. In reality, these systems mostly belong to earlier times, and if we find common traits among them across different places and eras, it's because they were adapted to older modes of production. Feminist ideas didn't magically appear in women's minds at the end of the 19th century. Ideas are the product of an era, not the other way around. Historical conditions, very concretely, the modes of production, technological and scientific levels, determine ideas far more than ideas shape history. The history of feminism isn't the story of the suffragettes, and the history of the abolition of slavery doesn't boil down to white men waking up one day and deciding it was wrong. Slavery was simply becoming obsolete with the Industrial Revolution and the steam engine. What I'm trying to say is that modern society is the product of modern conditions, and that makes your return to pre-feminism projects frankly complicated, because for that to happen, women themselves would have to want it. And why would they? Modern feminism is literally perfect for them. They keep the advantages of the past while now being treated as equals, even superiors, to men. In the past, women were considered legal minors. Today, they're seen as free and independent, while still retaining the specific protection status that came from being minors. Being under a husband's authority also meant being under his responsibility. That status had a flaw, lack of autonomy, but it also had a strength, protection. Today, women have kept their symbolic status as protected and innocent while gaining formal equality. We're even starting to question the presumption of innocence when it comes to topics that concern them more specifically, like rape or sexual assault. For instance, you could hear, "Our country is finally enshrining in law that consent must be the central element of our sexual relations. Women will no longer have to prove that there was violence or intimidation during an assault for it to be recognized as sexual assault." From Equality Minister Irene Montero from the far-left Podemos party, we're ready to scrap one of the very foundations of justice, proof and presumption of innocence, to make life easier for women because, you see, these innocent creatures would never lie. In short, women will never massively attack a system that benefits them. And if women aren't on your side, know that men won't be either. Many are too afraid to say what they think for fear of being kicked out of their social, relational, or professional circles. And frankly, is it even desirable? Let's suppose this woman, who has always despised you for natural reasons, is finally assigned to you by cultural ones. Besides the occasional sexual satisfaction she might bring you, do you think it's desirable to share your life with someone who deep down despises you? I don't. Now let's address the second criticism. I didn't offer any solution to the black pill. Yet, toward the end of the video, I said, if, for example, someone logically comes to the conclusion, or just feels, that having a romantic partner is a condition for happiness, and they're a heterosexual man who's below a 3 out of 10, then they are almost doomed to suffer for the rest of their life. And from that point, the logical solution might seem to be suicide. I'm not saying you should or shouldn't do it. I'm just laying out the thought process that can follow. That being said, I do acknowledge that suicide is a blind spot in black pill content, often brushed aside with phrases like cope or rope. This gives the whole discourse an unrealistic feel, as few people seem willing to dig into the gravity of what's being said. So today, we're going to try and focus on that question as freely as possible. And to begin with, let's try to define the scope of the topic. The black pill is true for everyone, a Chad or Truecell. This theory aims to be rational and scientific, and like any theory, it has limits we must continually clarify and refine. It describes the reality of both handsome and unattractive men. 1. Intellectually, there is no logical link between the body of knowledge contained in the black pill and suicide. The ideas of the black pill don't, in and of themselves, lead to suicide. For example, why would a Chad, upon discovering that he's particularly privileged and appreciated by women, start contemplating suicide? Realistically, I doubt this Chad had this realization through a black pill video on YouTube, but rather by basking in the daily attention women give him. Maybe he learned that his success isn't due to his seductive skills, but to mostly genetic factors for which he can't really take credit. In general, people attribute failure to external causes and success to internal ones. Even if he admits he's not responsible for his success with women, do you think that alone would drive him to suicide, honestly? Determined or not, you might as well enjoy life when nature's been generous, ha ha ha, is a much more likely reaction. So in reality, When people say the black pill leads to suicide or we must find solutions to the black pill, they're making a major error. They're confusing the black pill with the reality of the unattractive man. To rephrase, what they mean is the reality of the unattractive man or the experience of the unattractive man leads to suicide, or we must find solutions to the reality of the unattractive man. The black pill is not the reality of the unattractive man, but a set of ideas aiming to explain certain patterns in male-female relations in the sexual marketplace in general. It may seem like nitpicking, but I think it's important to clearly define what we're talking about to move forward effectively. Because of that confusion, people say the black pill leads to suicide because ugliness generates unmet needs for love. And according to the black pill, there are men ugly enough to be doomed to never fulfilling this need. So today, we're not going to try to solve the black pill, but rather explore possible avenues to improve the life of a true cell. Also, before we go further, I suspect some will argue, but can't they satisfy that need for love differently? Don't you have parents who love you, brothers or sisters, friends? And this reveals another problem. There may indeed be different types of love, but our modern languages lack the words to distinguish them clearly, and this causes confusion. In English, for example, we just have love. You love your wife, your mother, your brothers, even God or a pastry. Whereas in ancient Greek, there were many different words to describe types of love: eros, romantic and sexual love; philia, friendly, brotherly love; storge, familial, natural love; parents, children; agape, spiritual, unconditional love, often used for love of God. You are not here to hear about ancient Greek, but I wanted to precise that this lack of richness in the way we express love makes it harder for ugly men to present as legitimate their desire for love as they can be opposed that they already have it from their parents or family. I think that someone needs different types of love. If we maybe don't need all types of love, I think most need eros. So, the problem for true selves lies in their material reality. They are ugly. That becomes a real issue if they consider access to eros love as a condition for happiness. You could be as ugly as the elephant man and have no desire for social life, and in that case, the absence of that love wouldn't cause suffering, since desire is necessary for suffering. However, in most cases, we agree that the desire does exist. So for a true self, the problem is this: deeply desiring things that are inaccessible due to unchangeable material factors, which generates a level of suffering just as intense as the desire itself. To try to reduce or eliminate that suffering, there seem to be a few clear options. I'm numbering the options just for structure. This doesn't mean I claim the list is exhaustive. It just means I don't see any others right now. Option 1. If possible, change your material reality, i.e., your physical appearance, enough to no longer fall into the true self category. But by definition, a true self is someone who starts too far behind to hope that muscle building or a better haircut will compensate. There's potentially cosmetic surgery, expensive, not accessible for every type of issue or deformity, and not always guaranteed to bring satisfactory or sufficient results to reach the critical threshold that would allow you to hope to find someone. However, I encourage you to check thoroughly whether there's a surgical solution to your problem before discarding this option. Also, it's crucial to understand clearly where you stand in terms of physical appearance and avoid hastily self-labeling as a true cell. The true cell diagnosis is serious. It impacts your life expectancy. So, avoid pronouncing rushed verdicts on yourself or others. If option 1 is not available to you, if you are truly a true cell, then let's move on to option 2. Change your perception of the situation. This option is divided into several approaches. Approach A. Stop desiring Eros love either temporarily or permanently, or at least stop seeing it as essential to your happiness. Approach B. Lock yourself into false hope. Convince yourself daily that a miracle will happen during or even after life. Approaches A and B are often recommended by psychologists or close ones. First, they say, everything comes to those who wait, or it'll happen one day, just be patient. Then, once time has passed and, unsurprisingly, only brought old age, they switch to, there's more to life than that, which basically denies your right to have this desire and encourages you to abandon it. A psychologist's job is not to find solutions to your problems. They treat you as the problem to manage. Their goal is to manage your mental health. And to that end, telling you half-truths or influencing you to abandon your dreams may be part of their tools. Let's be clear. Since psychology often flirts with pseudoscience, there's a wide range of psychologist profiles, and I imagine each one kind of does their own thing based on instinct. Still, I encourage you to at least try going to one. Who knows? It might help. There are variants of these approaches. TikTok-style stoicism, which consists of pretending you no longer desire, and thus no longer suffer. From my point of view, it's like saying, suffer in silence and hope it makes you cool over time. I don't find that very serious, honestly. People who try to convince themselves they chose their misery. People who try to deny their suffering by claiming they're in control of the situation and consciously chose isolation. M.G. Tao's Men Going Their Own Way, whom we'll now rename M. Tao's Men Sent Their Own Way. We can also mention religious attempts to solve this issue by framing celibacy as a virtue, spiritual battle, even a superior state compared to conventional couples. These nihilistic systems tend to simply deny the value of life itself in favor of an afterlife where injustices will be corrected and souls consoled. For example, the Quran promises an afterlife full of earthly and carnal pleasures. The Christian afterlife, on the other hand, plunges us for eternity into agape, God's infinite spiritual love. Side note, it would be strange for a God to create a nature that needs injustice to function. Nature needs inequality, injustice, for evolution to work. So if a good and omnipotent God designed nature, why did he choose to make its engine natural selection and its fuel injustice? That implies that evil isn't the result of free will, but is at the heart of life, the heart of the structures supposedly created by a loving God. Anyway, I imagine theologians have plenty of bizarre answers. I don't plan to dig into theodicy here. We're still in option 2. changing your perception of the situation. Approach C, the chemical approach. This is also used by psychologists because it's just a variant of the first two. You alter hope and desire by introducing chemical substances into the body. This approach shouldn't be dismissed, but I don't really understand the appeal of the substances prescribed by psychiatrists. They often have numerous and unpleasant side effects. In exchange for what? A semi-lethargic state? A sort of emotional smoothing? I find the downsides obvious, but the upsides much less so. That's why I much prefer illegal drugs, which are basically the same, but we call them drugs instead of medicine. They have the advantage of offering clear positive and negative effects. However, the negative ones can be deadly, so it's up to you to weigh the pros and cons depending on how much you value staying alive. Approach D, TikTok hedonism and escapism. This includes the accumulation of pleasures to distract yourself, literally diverting your gaze from your problems. Once again, this isn't that different from the other approaches. It's about numbing yourself, losing yourself in video games or anime. But also, and here it overlaps with approach C, in more carnal pleasures like masturbation, prostitution, or excessive food consumption. So we've described the two main options. Change the cause of the problem by improving your appearance if possible. Change how you see the problem through the various approaches we just went over. It's important to note, no one chooses their approach the way you pick an answer on a quiz or a pastry at a bakery. These aren't definitive and spontaneous choices. They result from each person's past experiences, which lead them organically to flutter between different options and approaches. And now, here we are, the final option, suicide. Indeed, this is an option that addresses the problem of suffering. If we consider death as the definitive end of consciousness, then ending life also ends suffering. At first glance, we could evaluate the validity of suicide by weighing all the options and selecting the best one according to criteria we'd arbitrarily define. For example, if you believe life is worth living only if it contains more pleasure than suffering, then you could imagine placing your life on a scale. On one side, the suffering you've lived and will live. On the other, the pleasure you've experienced and expect to. This immediately raises a key point. There's a need for estimation, which means uncertainty. You have to try to predict the future, which is risky. Even if reasonable predictions can be made, we must admit there are limits. It remains an estimate. That's a deep issue because the act that might follow such an estimate, suicide, is definitive. We can still predict certain future events. For example, in the near future, an adult won't go from 1.57 meters to 1.83 meters after age 21. Maybe one day there'll be technological advances that allow such changes, but for now it seems unlikely. Even limb-lengthening surgery isn't there yet. We might imagine futuristic genetic treatments and more. But can we really base our hopes on such uncertain possibilities? Can we mentally and physically mobilize enough effort for survival when all we have is a faint hope. Let's get concrete. Let's take the example of Mr. Celestine, our true self friend. Celestine is a saint. He's 1.65 meters tall, has a deformed face, no degree, no money. He's 25 and hasn't had any social contact in years. Can we tell Celestine that continuing to live under these conditions is better than dying? No, because it ultimately depends on arbitrary personal standards and Celestine's own desires. To answer that, we must define a subjective framework, because there is no objective, true or false, in absolute value judgments. Saying something is worth it requires human subjectivity, and that's why there will never be a fixed answer. So let's go back to our earlier framework and admit life is worth living if it contains more pleasure than suffering. Let's also say Celestine is one of those men who consider access to eros, love, a condition for happiness, and that his desire for women is so intense that their absence causes equally intense suffering. At that point, suicide seems like a completely reasonable option. However, it becomes clear that a simple balance scale isn't the right tool to judge whether life is worth it. This pleasure-suffering approach misses the essential point. Haven't there been days where everything went wrong, yet some small spark made that day feel worth living? I think so, and I think love has that power. Which love? Eros seems like a good candidate. Life is hard, and it's made up of a lot of suffering for a lot of people. Proof of that is people who aren't crazy end up believing in crazy stories because they give meaning to their suffering. For example, imagining that life is a divine test and that each suffering brings us closer to some ideal of piety. I don't believe that being loved by a nice girl can solve all problems. But life is hard enough to require being supported by two. The love I'm talking about allows, I think, to be able to reach the next day. And not only that, it gives, as I was saying, a meaning to this lost in advance struggle, because it's beautiful to lose as a pair. So, what about our friend Celestine? What can he do? First, even if it's very unlikely he'll succeed, I'd still say, try. Try to get what you want, just a little bit. Try your luck with some girls, adapt it to your life. If you're a NEET, try online. If you're in college, try both online and in real life. It can even become a form of coping in itself. Just remember, it's a dangerous one, because reality checks hit hard, especially after you show her your face if it's online. But let's be honest, Celestine is 25 now. He's probably already tried, and he's still alone. So what now? Roping? Maybe not yet. If you can reasonably assess that no physical improvement will help you, then maybe your best move is to explore every cope available, without shame. From video games and weed to prostitution and opioids, just keep in mind some copes might help you for a week and ruin you for the rest of your life. Drugs can be a good true sales tool if used properly and with caution, but they can also push you down a path with no return. So think carefully when choosing the order in which you explore your copes. I suggest keeping drugs for the very end of your coping journey. Only start using them if you know you genuinely don't mind dying soon. You might actually live a long time with drugs, but mistakes are easy and often fatal. Better to expect the worst so you don't die with regrets. In the end, there's no glory in suffering. There will be no justice afterward, and nobody will care about you being dead. Outside of your family, maybe. Don't think suicide will show them or prove them something. Many people pretend that suicide is an easy way out, but they haven't tried going through with it. I can guarantee you it's not easy, even if some methods are easier than others. What I mean is, you should never feel trapped or forced to do it. Just let yourself live, and at some point, I guess, you'll just feel like you're done. And that's when it's about estimating what can still be done. I think it's really important to just give up. Give up on suicide, too. It's not something you have to do. It's something life will likely push you toward if you're a true self. No need to rush it right now. That's all for me. I guess my answer is a long and boring version of cope or rope. But there's really no easy answer to this. It's hard to truly reflect on a topic like this when you're living it. Each year, life gets harder and makes roping seem more reasonable than the year before. That's why my closing message isn't a hotline number or a blind plea to hold on, but rather, don't rope too soon. There are still plenty of copes left to try. May Saint Hamoudi guide you all, buddy boyos.
That's important. I'm a Blackpool Jedi.